Anyway, yes, unfortunately, you deal with this subject, you're always up for a prank, and I've become, I think, perpetually known now as the alien dude. That's my moniker. Anyway, we're going to talk about this subject tonight, and I'm glad Carl sort of mentioned there, because I even find in Christian circles, even amongst some of my peers, that they sort of regard this as one of those sort of fringe subjects. But I would bet that any of you that are involved in any form of evangelism, that are out there talking to people, this subject actually would have come up at some stage. It's a real world issue, and Carl mentioned the book, for example, and it's actually been an Amazon top 50 bestseller, the only creationist book to do that. And I don't say that to boast, but to actually illustrate a point that who would you think buys more books on Amazon, the Christian community or the secular community? Yeah, and so we actually believe that more non-Christians have read this book than Christians. And you heard a great testimony from John Hartnett the other night about his son coming to the Lord through this book. And that's what's happened out there. We've heard about the complexity of the cell, and we've just heard Dr. Sanford saying that the whole search for extraterrestrial life is based upon this evolutionary premise. We'll see that as we go along. I'm pleased when other ministries get hold of the information too, and this was a ministry that advertised this book in World Magazine as one of the top 10 books every Christian should read. That was pretty encouraging. That was unknown to us. But I want to tell a story there. You see that little symbol up there, the no alien sticker? These guys have a ministry in the United States where they just hand out free stickers, create awareness of this subject. And I asked if I could use it to design a sticker for my website, and there it is there. And I was in my local shopping mall. I just got back from the States, and I was parking my car. It was under this undercover car park. You know what they're like, they're quite echoey. And I shut the door on the car, and I was walking towards the entrance of the mall, and I heard this voice scream out across the car park, "Oi, mate, you, oi, stop!" And so I looked around with about a dozen other people, and this guy started running at me, pointing his finger, saying, "Yeah, you, stop, stop." And I thought, it's going to be on. What's happening here? And he walked up to me breathlessly, and he said, "Oh, mate, I saw that sticker on your car. Where do you think UFOs come from?" In the middle of a shopping centre. Now, and then another point. You don't have to know a lot about this subject. I just gave him like 4 or 5 quick facts. And I said, well, no 2 UFOs have ever been seen alike. We've never seen them entering our atmosphere from outside the Earth. When they appear to be already here. Spacecraft change shape. They merge into one another. They morph. I said, how can nuts and bolts spacecraft do that? I said, what about people who claim alien abductions? They claim the aliens are walking through the walls or through the roofs. How can real physical beings do that stuff? You see, just a few quick facts. He said, wow, he says, I've never heard any of that stuff before. He said, that's incredible. He said, how come you know so much? And I said, well, I just happened to have written a book on the subject. And then I sold him a copy. So the real question everybody really wants to know is this. Where do UFOs come from, and what are they? And generally everybody I speak to has made their mind up or has an opinion, but actually has not really looked into the subject. So let's just look at this, because what do people mean when they mean a UFO? Well, this is the author of that book there, the Mammoth Encyclopedia of Extraterrestrial Encounters. It's 900 pages long. That tells you there's a lot going on for a start, doesn't it? And Ronald Story, the author, he says, talking about his 5-year-old son, without having any prior discussions on the matter, I asked my son, Brian, what is a UFO? He answered without hesitation, a flying saucer. So I rephrased the question, what is inside a flying saucer? To which he replied matter-of-factly, people from other planets. Nothing could better illustrate to me that UFO had become a symbol in our culture for the vehicle that carries humanoids from another planet. And what he's really talking about is something that's become known as the extraterrestrial hypothesis, or the ETH. This is generally the sort of the view that most people have about this subject. Real physical spacecraft carrying real physical beings coming from a galaxy far, far away. Now, this became popularized in the 50s and the 60s, where evolution really started to dominate in the schools, and if evolution happened on the Earth, well, it must have happened somewhere else, and they might be older, in terms of the evolutionary scale, therefore they're more advanced in their technology, so who's to say they can't build hyperdrive spaceships and visit the Earth, for example? But as understanding about the enormous size of our universe increased, in recent years, of course, it's become obvious that these spacecraft, if they did exist, could not travel the vast distances across our galaxy or our universe to reach here. You know, our Milky Way galaxy, of which our sun is just one of maybe a couple of 100 billion stars, you know, is 100,000 light years across. So just imagine, even if you could travel at the speed of light, it would take you 100,000 years to cross our galaxy. So, you know, when you hop on board the spaceship, you'd have to, you know, raise children to be nuclear physicists to run the, you know, the antimatter propulsion systems, and then your grandchildren would have to be raised to be nuclear physicists, and so on and so forth. It's just beyond the realms of, you know, of reasonable thought. So let's have a look, because this whole idea really of extraterrestrial life, as I said, is based upon this evolutionary principle. Of course, there is one other view, that God may have created aliens, but I'm going to leave that right till the end, because that's the most asked question I really got. You see, all of this is based really upon this materialistic idea. Here's Carl Sagan, arguably one of the most famous scientists in the modern era. He had he's actually had the largest selling science book of all time, Cosmos, his TV show. Do you remember that show? At the beginning, it had the waves crashing on the shore, and the narrator used to say in the voiceover, the cosmos is all that is, ever was, or ever will be. A materialist, as in matter or atoms, are all there ever are or will be. You see, but as we've heard during this week, for the materialist, the origin of life is a mystery. After all, a lot of people, like Sir Francis Crick, who just co-discovered the DNA molecule, an ardent anti-Christian, but when he discovered the complexity and all the coded information written on the DNA, rather than accede that to a supernatural creator, he said, well, the aliens must have put it there. But then you've got a problem, haven't you? Because if the aliens created life on Earth, then who created the aliens that created life on Earth? And then who created those aliens who were the creators of the aliens who created life on Earth, and so on and so forth? So all you're doing is pushing the problem out there where it can't be solved. See, I mentioned the Big Bang because that's really the whole idea at all. You know, in a 14 billion-year-old universe, as I said, there could be older and more technologically advanced places. And we've heard a lot about the Big Bang, and you know, I think the presumption is we all sort of know what it's about. But if we're talking about the Big Bang, are we talking about the realm of operational science or historical science? Historical science. It's a belief about the past that you and I were not there to witness. Now, the standard simplified theory of the Big Bang, although it's simplified, is very accurate, says, you know, in the beginning there was nothing, and there was this little particle that contained all the energy and the matter and the space of the entire universe, and then for some reason this particle suddenly expanded. And, you know, Einstein, E equals mc squared, energy converted to matter, and ultimately clouds of dust, gas, coalesced and formed stars, planets, and ultimately human beings, something like that. And that's really the whole basis, if you like, of the secular or evolutionary view of alien life. That's how it got there, that life must have evolved somewhere else if it evolved on the Earth. Well, I always like to throw this quote up, slide up here by Alan Guth. It was a comment on an article that he wrote in Discover magazine. Alan Guth is the father of the inflation theory of the Big Bang. And in abbreviating his work, the cover said, the universe burst into something from absolutely nothing, zero, nada, and as it got bigger, it became filled with even more stuff that came from absolutely nowhere. So you can see the scientific rationale behind that. I like this cartoon. He says, let me get this straight. First there was nothing, and then it exploded. See, what's the alternative? Well, the alternative, I think, what I'm about to show you, for me personally, I think is the most profound statement in all of Scripture. It's this one. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Why do I think it's so profound? Well, I'll break it down for you. That's why. In the beginning, God. That tells us right off the bat that He was there before the universe. You know, now lots of people then say, well, who made God? But the very reason you ask that is because you are actually part of the space-time universe that God created. You see? I want you to think of this concept, for example, of what we understand as time. What is time? I mean, I use a watch to measure time, but it's based upon a rotation of the Earth, and in our sort of location, in our neighborhood of the galaxy, we have planets, and we know the Earth revolves around the sun. That gives us a year, so we use those as, if you like, as measurements of time. But if there was no physical universe, no atoms, no matter, no planets or anything else, did time exist? No, I don't believe it did, not as we can understand it. You know, the Bible talks about God, you know, inhabiting eternity. What's eternity? Is it billions of years in the past or billions of years in the future, or is it timelessness? You see, a bit hard to understand those things, isn't it? So think about this statement here. Jonathan Sarfati uses this a lot in his books. Everything which has a beginning has a cause. Everything which has a beginning has a cause. See, you and I have a beginning, and we know what cause does, right? And if I looked at this auditorium, I know that somebody must have thought about it, designed it, built it, it had a beginning, therefore it had a cause. Now, whether you're a big banger or a creationist, if I was to ask you the question, did the universe have a beginning, what must you answer? Therefore, it must have had a cause. That's a scientific principle. We don't see anything coming into being without a cause. But if God has no beginning, then he doesn't need a cause, does he? He is the self-existent one. Difficult for you to understand because you are bound by these dimensions that we live in. It's impossible for us, in some respects, to try to understand or comprehend what it is like if you're outside of our dimensions. So just summing up that first part, as my little friend here says, if Earthlings didn't believe in evolution, I wouldn't exist. I pretty much think that sums it up. Now, here we appeal to all the sci-fi fans like myself out there. You know, how feasible is it to travel to other planets? I was fortunate enough to visit the Kennedy Space Center a few years ago, and you know, the Apollo rockets, the Saturn V rockets that launched man into space and to the moon, and the space shuttle rockets are the most powerful vehicles mankind has ever built. You can see their top speed there is 28,800 kilometers per hour, 17,900 miles per hour. You know, they are not nearly powerful enough to get you around our galaxy or even around our solar system quickly. You need some vehicles like this, right? Now, those of you, I see a lot of straight faces, so you don't know what they are. That means you don't watch Star Trek. That means you need to get a life. But anyway, so I have all 54 DVDs at home, so there we go. Well, these guys travel at warp speed, and warp is supposed to be much faster than the speed of light, these craft. But let's have a look at the problems with this idea. There are the energy requirements. You know, take the energy requirements of about 98 Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs to propel just a 500-gram ball to just half the speed of light. Speed of light, 300,000 kilometers every second, or 186,000 miles per second. And see, at this speed, it would take 4 million years to reach Andromeda, the next nearest galaxy, at half the speed of light. We go on. There's this. The problem is there are objects in space. Space is not empty. There's estimated that there's about 100,000 dust particles for every cubic kilometer of space. At just 1/10 of the speed of light, the impact would be like 10 tons of TNT going off inside your spaceship. Wouldn't be much fun, would it? Because you know, if you watch Star Trek, though, they have those deflector arrays, don't they? So you can detect a grain of dust traveling at warp factor 9, and that grain of dust is about 3 trillion kilometers away, something like that. It's really science fiction. We'll have a look at this. These are just a couple of panels from the side of the Hubble Space Telescope. Can you see all the little impact marks? Didn't cause a lot of damage, but you can see them and just how much stuff there is actually in space. Look at this. This is a window of the former Space Shuttle Challenger. In 1983, a paint flake just 0.2 of a millimeter in diameter caused that gouge on the window. Cost them $50,000 to replace the window. That's some glazing bill, isn't it? Here are other problems. Changing directions. You know, 1G is equivalent to Earth's gravity. You know, 9Gs could possibly kill an Air Force pilot without special training. They actually get taught to constrict their blood vessels, their muscles, to try to constrict their blood flow, so when they pull these fast turns, they actually don't pass out. So, you know, when Captain Jean-Luc Picard sits on board of the bridge of the Enterprise and he says, "Make it so," and they jump into warp speed, you'd be exerting millions of Gs upon the occupants. You'd be splattered up against the wall, wouldn't you? But that's why they have inertial dampers. So when you do U-turns at warp factor 6, that doesn't happen to you. There's cosmic radiation. As Carl said, I've done a lot of radio interviews, a lot of travel around the world in the last 3 years, and he told me, in fact, that every time you travel in a plane, you actually get a little increased dose of cosmic radiation. Perhaps that's what's wrong with me, but As you travel faster in space, you actually would be increasing those dosages, and no one knows what approaching the speed of light would be like. It would be likely that the doses would kill you. So you've got space radiation to worry about. But here's the number one objection to this idea that you can fly around the universe faster than the speed of light, and that is that Einstein theorized that the maximum speed limit within our physical universe would be the speed of light. Well, in fact, you can't get to the speed of light because you'd require an infinite amount of energy. You've got to sort of convert every atom in the universe to energy to try to get yourself to the speed of light. Remember that physics class from school? As your speed increases, your mass increases. So basically, it's impossible. It's in the realms of science fiction. That's why you hear ideas like warp space or hyperspace. They're jumping out of our space-time dimensions and traveling along in hyperspace and then darting back in when they want to, or creating warp bubbles in the fabric of space. It's all science fiction. So as they've realized this, you see, the true UFO believer says, well, hang on, okay, if they're not coming from other planets and they can't come in real physical craft, they've got to be coming from somewhere, because I already believe that there's alien life. So they've come up with something called the interdimensional hypothesis, the IDH. And I've said here it overcomes the travel distance problem. Some aliens claim to have evolved, there's that word again, to some higher spiritual state. Don't have bodies like ours. They actually don't even need spaceships. They can will themselves between dimensions and all sorts of things. And I've said that the IDH is the most popular view held by serious ufologists, that's people that study UFOs, has religious appeal, particularly to the New Age movement. This is where in recent years this exercise or this study has started to take a more sinister turn. It's really been usurped by more religiously inclined people. I just want to mention here something about string theory, because I have a bit of concern that a lot of Christians are saying, well, I think string theory is good because string theory talks about, perhaps multiple dimensions, and hey, those multiple dimensions could refer to the spiritual dimensions mentioned in the Bible. Spiritual dimensions in the Bible? Maybe a spiritual dimension, but about dimensions. And what we need to understand here, string theory has no evidential support whatsoever. It's a complete mathematical hypothesis, and it's a subset of the Big Bang. So please don't fall for that one when you hear about string theory. It's, again, a secular evolutionary idea used to support the Big Bang. So summing up, here's a quote from the book. The common denominator of both camps, that's the extraterrestrial hypothesis and the interdimensional hypothesis, is the belief that evolution has occurred for countless eons all over on the Earth and all over the universe. This point cannot be emphasized strongly enough. It is the basis for virtually all belief in alien life, whatever form one thinks that life might take. However, there is something going on, and we do see strange things. You can see there in the center picture the Capitol Dome in Washington. These lights buzzed the Capitol Dome in 1952. There's lots of footage, videos of it. They were seen on 3 separate radar installations. The US Air Force was dispatched and the lights disappeared. When the Air Force landed, out came the lights again. Air Force went up and then the lights disappeared from radar. What's going on? Crop circles. I don't have time to talk about it tonight, fully explained in my book. I think they're basically always man-made, but when they're made, some strange supernatural phenomenon seems to occur around them. Roswell, again, you've probably all heard of Roswell, 1947. They believe an alien flying saucer crash landed on a ranch there, and they've taken away the wreckage and the bodies and taken them away to secret bases like Area 51 and all this conspiracy theory stuff. It's great, isn't it? By the way, that picture up on the left there, Mexico City, 1997, probably the most well-documented videotaped UFO event in history. The silvery, shiny craft hovering in downtown Mexico City, dozens of video cameras trained at it, and still no explanation to this day what they are. Because people see it and they think, well, surely, we've seen it, the government must know about it, therefore, if they're not saying anything, they must be hiding the truth. But here's the thought. If this was some supernatural phenomena, what would you expect the government to say about it? They pose no threat to national security or something like that. Of course, they're not going to explain something that they don't understand. The other culprit in believing this is science fiction. I've been having a joke about Star Trek. I often mention it's the most syndicated TV show ever in history, believe it or not, Star Trek The Next Generation. Those 2 columns on the left are just some movies I thought of. On the right, some of the TV shows. Science fiction is the #1 entertainment genre of all time. The highest grossing movies of all time, probably 3 out of the top 5, I think at the moment, are sci-fi. It's that popular. And folks, here's something I just want to point out. You see, we actually tend to underestimate the influence of the media because most of us have actually grown up with it in our lifetime. We see it every day. And we don't realise or have failed to realise how powerful it is in influencing our ideas and our thoughts. I mentioned over lunch, for example, why would companies like Coca-Cola spend billions of dollars advertising if it didn't work? It influences people. And sci-fi is one of the major influences in people believing in the idea of extraterrestrial life. So there are strange objects in the skies, and then there are also people that have strange encounters. They really do. And I started off, I have to say, as a bit of a skeptic in this regard, but when you meet lots and lots of people and they have the same experiences from all over the world, come from different demographies and different geographical locations, how could they all be similar? And there really is something going on. Those pictures you see there, a woman who claims to be a Christian. She says, I'm a Christian, but she sees UFOs all through the Bible. One there is parting the Red Sea. Elijah's being raptured into a spacecraft. You could see Moses there being spoken to in the burning bush, which was really just a radio transmitter beamed down by the mothership. But we have a chuckle, but you see more and more the supernatural is being explained away as maybe some advanced technology that the primitive Bible writers maybe described as gods or something like that. I was at a meeting in Brisbane not too long ago, and I happened to mention, that people like this think that Jesus is just an advanced extraterrestrial. That's how he could raise the dead, calm the seas and the storms. It was just all down to technology. And a very well-dressed middle-aged man and his wife both stood up in unison and shouted out from the audience, "And what's wrong with that?" in the middle of a church. I mentioned Roswell in New Mexico. Thousands visit there every year to commemorate the time when they think that we had alien visitors from another planet. And you can even go down, there's a little foundation stone to commemorate it. See the street lamp there? That's outside the Roswell Convention Museum and Art Centre. Look at the Coke machine there. See one like that? In fact, something exciting, well, probably exciting for you guys, I'm not too sure, and maybe I'll defer judgment till after I go, but I've actually been invited this year to be a speaker at the annual Roswell Convention. I think I'm the first young Earth creationist to ever be invited there. This is some of the people that I'm going to encounter. This is from last year. These are photos from 2008. But can you see it's become a substitute religion? It provides alternative meaning and purpose to life for these people. Maybe those advanced aliens are going to come and solve global warming and fix holes in our ozone and do all these things by virtue of their advanced technology. You can see how people are placing their faith in something that here is unseen, untested, and unprovable. Well, I'm going to show you some quotes now, a few of them, but this is information from the leading UFO researchers of our day. So in one respect, they should probably be hostile witnesses to my Christian theory, if you like. But my book, what I've tried to do is use the secular research that they have found. And that might surprise you, but when I reach the conclusion, maybe you'll see why. Now, you heard the music a little while ago from Close Encounters, but do you remember that movie, Close Encounters? A really good movie. I don't know if some of you young ones might not remember it, but it actually was based upon some genuine research by Dr. J. Allen Hynek. He was a government researcher under Project Blue Book for the US government, which investigated UFOs under Blue Book and some other various programs for over 40 years. And he went off to start his own research organisation called QFOS. His contemporary and the lead character in the movie was a Frenchman. Do you remember that? Was based upon this man here, Dr. Jacques Vallée. Probably written more UFO books than any other person. He's a scientist. But have a look what he says here. Belief in the reality of UFOs is spreading rapidly at all levels in society throughout the world. Books and periodicals appear at an ever-increasing rate. Documentaries and major films are being made now by young people of the UFO generation. He says, who grew up with flying saucer stories, who have moved into influential positions in the media. Steven Spielberg, for example, who produced a lot of these movies. Here's what Dr. J. Allen Hynek says. If you ever watch this movie again, when the flying saucer lands, have a look, because he makes a cameo in the movie. He's deceased now. He said, certainly the phenomenon has psychic aspects. I don't talk about them very much because to a general audience, the words psychic and occult have bad overtones. They say, oh, it's all crazy, but the fact is there are psychic things. For instance, UFOs materialize and dematerialize. There are people who have had UFO experiences, I've blocked out the word, who claim to have developed psychic ability. There have been reported cases of precognition, where people had foreknowledge or forewarning they were going to see something, a change of outlook, a change of philosophy of persons' lives. Now you see, those are rather tricky things to talk about openly, but it's there. Many people like Jacques Vallée and I, to some extent, feel that it might be a conditioning process. I agree. What happens is these ideas, these encounters that people have, they are changed forever by them. See, he really used words like paraphysical and paranormal because, to the best of my knowledge, he was not a Christian, so he didn't start off with the same set of glasses that I have. Now, what word might we use to describe that phenomena? Spiritual, supernatural, for example. Well, he was talking really about things interdimensional. Now, if there is another dimension, you and I can't go there, but I believe we have had visitors from that dimension. One really famous visitor from that dimension, the Lord Jesus Christ himself. Remember when he stood before Pilate, he said, "My kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is from another place." And the disciples, and talking about that transfiguration event, you know, when he appeared in his heavenly glory and that voice came down from heaven that said, "This is my son with whom I am well pleased," they said, "We did not follow cleverly invented stories when we told you about the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. We were eyewitnesses of his majesty." But you know, Jesus warns us. He warns us in Matthew 24. He says, "For false Christs, false prophets will appear, will perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible." Could he be referring to these times where we do see strange supernatural manifestations in the sky, where people are having strange encounters in the middle of their night in their bedroom? Interesting. Well, let's look at the nature of UFOs. What is a UFO? It's an unidentified flying object, but as I said, it doesn't really mean that today. As I said, they've been seen throughout history. Stories of ancient people seeing flying objects, sometimes with people on board. Been seen on radar by multiple credible witnesses. They can materialize and dematerialize. Airline pilots and even Air Force pilots have seen them disappear right before their eyes. They perform aerial maneuvers that defy the laws of physics. A description by a young Australian man saw one accelerate to the ground and do a U-turn and come back up without even slowing down. Really sort of can't happen. They change shape, they merge into one another. They cause electrical disturbances and outages, just like in that movie Close Encounters, and sometimes animals are spooked. They've changed shape over the years. For example, I mentioned, like the ancient Romans and Greeks saw flying shields with people on board. 1896, 1898, there was the airship wave, which they looked like those cylindrical airships that they were just about to arrive in North America. They mostly appear as lights in the sky. You can see there the most common shape today is this triangle shape. And I haven't figured out why yet, but that seems to be the most common occurrence of them. Have a look here. Here's a great photo, 1957 across New Mexico, moved across the sky, never made any sound as it went. Still not explained to this day. Now here's the problem. See, I can't grab a UFO as in one of those objects in the sky and bring it in, and we can't do empirical tests on it. So how do we unpick what's going on here? Well, there's an alarming escalation into this, what's called the area of alien abductions, where people think they're being abducted by aliens, taken aboard the spaceship, all this type of stuff. So I believe that it's in this area where we can really unpick what's happening. And there's something called the classic abduction syndrome, or the CAS for short. And basically what researchers do, they have 8 markers. And if people have one of these experiences, they usually fall within the pattern of these 8. Not always all 8, might be 3 or 4, but they normally don't fall outside of these 8. For example, there's a capture. They may be driving their car, they see a light over there, they stop the car, and that's the last thing they remember. There's hours of missing time. The next thing, they wake up behind the wheel of their car. They describe that there's examinations when they think they're on board the spaceship, crude medical examinations. They say that there's a conference They receive messages they believe telepathically, for example. They sometimes get a tour of the ship. We go on. They get taken on other journeys, or they think they do. There's a theophany, or the manifestation of a divine being. You know, the Raelians, if you've ever heard of them, they believe that Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, they're all living together in peace and harmony on the spacecraft, and you fuddy-duddy Christians have just got to get into the new age and get rid of your old ideas. They return to the earth, and there's an aftermath. They don't have any recollection, often no conscious recollection, but they show symptoms of being interfered with that trouble them. And then they might go off to go and see a UFO researcher who's already predisposed to this idea, and under hypnosis, for example, they'll recount the gory details of their event. But let's have a look at the nature of these abductions. Entities can pass through walls or suddenly appear in a room. Experiences are controlled or don't have any control of the situation, something known as sleep paralysis. And I know that people here will have probably experienced that in some other shape or form at one stage. They don't have conscious recollection of the events. They have injuries and markings. The similarities in these experiences to out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences. You know, people have said they've, died for a few minutes on the surgery table, and they've seen the great white light, and they've seen their dead relative stood at the end alongside aliens on the other side. What can be going on there? And they often make predictions of a future global chaos. This is really interesting. Now, depending on your eschatology, but I can tell you, whichever it is, there's something in here for you, because they brand it to suit everybody. But it closely mirrors what the Bible has to say about end times events. So it looks like these aliens can predict the future too. Well, I'm going to show you some quotes from some of the world's leading abduction researchers. To the best of my knowledge, these are people, again, who are not Christians, but let's listen to what they've got to say. Donna Higby. She says, I noticed a drastic change in the attitude of several of the abductees from one meeting to the next. People who'd been traumatized all their lives by ongoing abductions had only anger and mistrust for their non-human abductors, suddenly started saying they'd been told or shown that everything that happened to them was for their own good, that the abductors are highly spiritual beings. Highly spiritual. I thought we were talking about science. Helping the abductee to evolve spiritually. She says, by accepting this information, the abductees stopped fighting abduction and instead became passive and controlled. When I checked with other researchers, I found that this was a pattern that was repeating itself over and over again around the country. I became concerned these abductees were accepting explanations from entities that we know can be deceitful. Why would you want to believe someone that lies to you? Well, you see, the problem here is the experience can be real. You can have a real experience. You can have a real spiritual experience. But how do you discern or determine where it comes from? Note here she says they become passive and controlled. Well, it's something that I've described, or is described as Stockholm Syndrome, I believe, similar to Stockholm Syndrome. That's where people are, kidnapped, for example, and they suddenly find empathy with their abductors or their captors. You've seen examples of that. And they become given over to that cause. That's a very, very common occurrence with people that have had these experiences. They become evangelists, if you like, for these entities and really become immersed in New Age ideas, for example. Look at this. This was a quote by Lynn Cato, former senior bibliographer for the Library of Congress, that storing house where every bit of literature that gets published in the States gets stored. She says, a large part of the available UFO literature is closely linked with mysticism and the metaphysical. It deals with subjects like mental telepathy, automatic writing, and invisible entities, as well as phenomenon, which is wrong, like poltergeist manifestations and possession. She says many of the UFO reports now being published in the popular press recount alleged incidents that are strikingly similar to demonic possession and psychic phenomenon that have been long been known to theologians and parapsychologists. Here's some more. I just want to show you that I've just picked out a couple because it's full of it. John Keel, he said, the devil and his demons can, according to the literature, manifest themselves in almost any form, can physically imitate anything from angels to horrifying monsters with glowing eyes. Strange objects and entities materialize and dematerialize in these stories, just as the UFOs and their splendid occupants appear, disappear, walk through walls and perform other supernatural feats. Demonology is not just another crackpotology. Thousands of books have been written on the subject, many of them authored by educated clergymen, scientists and scholars, and uncounted numbers of well-documented demonic events are readily available to every researcher. Let me just stop there before I go on, because that's where it sort of rattles my cage. See what he says? Thousands of books have been written on this subject, really talking about the supernatural, explanations to these encounters. But if you read the UFO literature, it's not there. It's a bit like, this argument about evolution, creation. The evolutionary literature will not give over to the other side, will not make way. And it's the same here. And that's the problem. When people think they see something, they think, we'll need to go to a UFO expert, but those UFO experts are already immersed in believing in the idea and will not consider anything else. Look what else he says. He says the manifestations, occurrences described in this imposing literature are similar, if not entirely identical, to the UFO phenomenon itself. Victims of possession suffer the very same medical and emotional symptoms as the UFO contactees. See, what we're really talking about is the age-old deception. Now, I just want to be careful here, because you've got to be careful about looking at every sighting or every encounter and automatically saying, well, it's a spiritual manifestation. I'm talking about a very small percentage. Overwhelmingly, the majority of sightings and encounters can be explained as either natural or man-made phenomena, lenticular clouds and maybe aircraft or something like this that people mistake. Why do they mistake such benign objects for UFOs? Well, because of the saturation, because of the media and the speculation. Immediately we see something mysterious, we say, wow, it might be a UFO, when we really mean, an alien spaceship. See, the Bible, as we've said, is the history book of the universe. And, this is unlike any other history book. This one tells us the future, tells us what happens in the end, tells us what the devil's fate is as well. But right back there at the very beginning of time, at the very beginning of history, it tells us that there was a deception. What does it mean to be deceived? It's a word we bandy about, but to be deceived means you're going to be conned into believing something that's not true. Maybe what by? Or maybe by some powerful spiritual or supernatural occurrences, perhaps, that can deceive your very senses. But we are told to spiritually discern. How can you spiritually discern something if you don't believe the Bible or God to start with? Lucifer, the devil's name, literally means bearer of light or being of light. He masquerades as an angel of light. Right back there at the beginning, the cosmic war began. And what's happening now? Well, of course, Satan, the devil, is on a crash and burn policy, because he can read the end of the book just the same as you and I. He wants to take as many down with him as he can. Why does he want to do that? Why is he interested in taking down human beings with him? Because he knows who his creator was, and he's trying to spite him. And he knows whom the creator loves. The very one that he gave his life for, the very ones that he gave his life for. See, that's his motivation. 1 Timothy 4:1, it says, the Spirit clearly says that in later times some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. Can I utter a word of caution? Be careful of being deceived by your senses. Even in the church to some extent. We are so fascinated with the future and the supernatural. Make sure you discern via the Word of God. See, look what Jacques Vallée says here. He says, I propose the hypothesis that there is a control system for human consciousness. What takes place through close encounters with UFOs is control of human beliefs. I think he's spot on. Control of the relationship between our consciousness and physical reality. That this control has been enforced throughout history, that it is of secondary importance that it should now assume the form of sightings of space visitors. I think he's spot on again. He showed that in medieval times there were stories of, the incubus and the succubus, and then there were fairies and elves. Now, let's face it, if a little grey entity stood at the bottom of your bed in the middle of the night and said, I'm a fairy, well, you'd probably doubt your own sanity. But you know what people don't doubt today? And this little entity stands there and he says, I'm from a planet far, far away. I've chosen you. You're special. I've got a job for you. See? That's a life-changing experience for somebody. Particularly if they've never been to the church, don't know who Jesus is, never read the Bible. Can you imagine how that would be a defining moment in your life? I've been chosen. And I've met lots and lots of these people, and that's exactly how they think. And they are very, very, very difficult to talk to and to reach. See, we have to be careful of even saying to people like that, if you encounter people of saying, well, you know what, you're demon possessed or something like this, because they'll just turn around, go in the opposite direction and go into the arms of some willing UFO believer who'll just tell them what they want to hear. You had a real close encounter. The only way you can unpick this is by listening to the stories, hearing them out. Listen to everything they have to say. I'll give you an example. There are these, they often claim to be our creators. And I've met people that said, yeah, you know, our creators come from the Pleiades. And over here somebody says our creators come from Orion or Zeta Reticuli. And when you look at that, they can't all be right, can they? Who's telling the truth? For example, you can actually show demonstrably that some of the things these people are told are untruthful. It's quite easy. You know why? Because that's the nature of the devil. Jesus called him the father of lies. And how much truth did he say was in him? None. Can't help himself but lie. And he goes too far. John Ankerberg teamed with a Christian ufologist by the name of John Weldon. I think these guys pretty well sum it up. They say, how credible is it to think literally thousands of extraterrestrials would fly millions or billions of light years simply to teach New Age philosophy, deny Christianity and support the occult? Why would they consistently lie about things which we know are true? Why would they purposely deceive their contacts? See, why? If they're highly evolved, benevolent beings and they come here to fix the holes in our ozone, why do they stealthily kidnap us in the middle of the night and terrorize us? And why do people, you know, wake up scared and suffer post-traumatic stress syndrome or something like this? Doesn't make sense. It's because they're malevolent beings, not benevolent beings. And look at this passage in Galatians 1:8. How many times have you read this? But think of it in terms of what we're discussing tonight. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let him be eternally condemned. There's a heads up that fallen angels might come and preach an alternative gospel to you. Has that ever happened before? Oh, heard of a man called Joseph Smith, father of the Mormon religion. What happened to him? He had an encounter, didn't he, with an angel, and he was given extra biblical revelation, some gold tablets, told to go along and find them. And his job, you know what his job was? To sort out the apostate church. Who was the apostate church? So he was told. Us. And then there was a man named Muhammad. He went off and meditated in a cave for many months, didn't he? And he was given some extra biblical information. And years later, you know, they found bones and parchments and, stones and parchments, and they were later collated into the Quran. There's some debate amongst Islamic scholars as to when that happened. But again, it's based upon what I've described as the visitor experience. So let me just deal with this last question because, you know, Gary, the universe is so big, you know, surely God must have created life somewhere else. Can't be so big, you know, just for life on earth. Well, again, you're sort of thinking, if I can put it this way, a bit naturalistically. Because if God's the one that made the universe, it's not big to him, is it? It's big to us. But so what created so big? Well, let me just save that one for a while. But let's look at this question here. Did God create life on other planets? Well, Genesis 1:28 describes what we call the dominion mandate. That's where man was given dominion over the earth. Go and subdue the earth. So just think of this, aliens with advanced technology to visit the earth, you know, from that galaxy far, far away. Well, they'd have technology superior to us, therefore they'd be having dominion over us. That would break God's dominion mandate, wouldn't it? You know, Romans 8:21, 8:22 tells us the whole creation groans and travails. When you hear that sort of word like the whole creation or the heavens and earth, it's described as a merism. An all-inclusive statement means virtually everything that exists in time and space. Everything, the universe, it means. It tells us that the universe is under the curse. So if God had created life on other planets, they'd be affected by Adam's curse. You know, poor Mr. Spock out there on the planet Vulcan, Vulcans are now going to get cancers and die, probably as a result of mutational load, as we've heard John Sanford talk about. When God came to this earth to redeem mankind and his creation back to himself, right, he came as a man. You know, didn't come as a Klingon or something like that, did he? The church is described as Christ's bride throughout eternity. He's not going to have lots of brides throughout the universe. You know, being described as Christ's bride means he only has one bride. That's analogous to what happened in the Garden of Eden when there was one woman for one man for one woman. And that wound in his side, similarity there is to what was taken from Adam to form the first woman. He's not going to have lots of brides throughout the universe. It's symbolic of that monogamous relationship. You've got to be a physical descendant of Adam to be saved. Hypothetical aliens cannot be saved, Jesus was described as the last Adam because there was a real physical, historical first Adam. In Hebrews it tells you it's not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. So, summing up, the heavens are going to be destroyed, aren't they, by a fervent heat. So aliens who've been affected by the curse, through no fault of their own, who can't be saved because they're not human beings, are now going to be destroyed when God creates a new heavens and a new earth. That's why I know it's the whole creation that's affected, because God's going to recreate a new heavens and a new earth. Because the old one is cursed. There cannot be unfallen parts of the universe. 1 Peter 3:18 sums it up. For Christ died for sins once for all. He's not going to be crucified and raised again on other planets, is he? One of the blessings I've had in doing this subject, and I have to say it's not a very comfortable subject at times, because you get to meet a lot of interesting people. You have to sometimes go across to UFO meetings and conferences and read all their literature. Well, a lot of people look out there at the size of the universe and say, God, why so big? And maybe I used to do that. But in trying to wrap my mind around the universe and why it's so big and what else is out there, I've actually come to stand in awe of it. I don't think about that anymore. When I look at the universe, I just think about the one who made it. That's what we should be thinking about when we look out there. There's lots of passages like this one in Psalm 19:1 throughout Scripture. Tells us that the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the works of his hands. Think about that. How incredibly powerful, wise, and wonderful is our God if he could have created this enormous universe. The Bible says he's even counted the very hairs on our head. How can he do that? He can do that because he's the creator. That's why. And only the creator, the true Genesis creator, has the power to save you. The Word, Jesus, became flesh, made his dwelling among us. We've seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Hebrews also tells us when you look at Jesus, you are looking at the exact representation of his being, God in the flesh. That's why Jesus could do all the things that he did. So how to be immune from these deceptive experiences? Well, the Bible tells us the man without the Spirit, and this is the problem with so many people investigating this phenomena. The man without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God. They are foolishness to him. He cannot understand them because they are spiritually discerned. It's all about wearing the right set of glasses again. See, you're a secular evolutionary researcher. You're looking at this strange phenomena where things disappear and change shape. You don't believe in the supernatural. How do you explain it? You come up with more and more elegant theories. And it's quite clear. We've had visitors from another dimension, deceptive entities, haven't we? Called fallen angels. The Bible's full of them. We know things happen. There have been good angels sent too. And when they appear, they often appear physically. And they interact with human beings. And they're very, very powerful. That means fallen angels can be very, very powerful as well. Well, I think the universe is so big, so vast, and if I understand that God's the one that made it all, then I shouldn't worry. And in my book I mentioned the story of a couple of gentlemen, one who's become a good friend. He lives in Florida, and he described himself as a crystal ball rolling New Ager. And they were field researchers for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, the largest clearinghouse of UFO investigations in the world. And they said, look, everybody's trying to unravel this abduction experience, but instead of looking at people who have been abducted, is there any particular group of people that maybe have not been abducted? Let's think outside the squares. And they actually discovered there was a significant portion of the population who had never been abducted by an alien. Not a real alien, of course. And who do you think that was? Christians. Well, no, not just Christians. They were pretty precise. They actually came to understand, and I'm using their vernacular, that there were two types of Christians. There were talk the talk Christians, and they said there were walk the walk Christians. And to their understanding, they came to understand that no Bible-believing, born-again Christian at that time had one of these encounters. You know, they were interested. Joe Jordan, he ended up ringing his colleagues in MUFON, and they said, "We think we found something. You know, do you know that Christians are immune from these alien encounters?" You know, their friends said, "Oh yeah, we've heard about that, but that's just religious stuff." They ignored it. So what? Aliens don't like Christians. Big deal. So he rang his colleagues around the world, and they reported the same thing. It was being ignored. So they thought, no, we're really onto something here. We want to find out more and more. They put an ad in the paper, and they were inundated from people who'd had experiences and had called out in the name of Christ, and they'd stopped instantly. But these guys were not Christians who discovered this. And they weren't getting any help from the UFO community, something Jacques Vallée also discovered too. So they said, well, only way to do this is let's go and take ourselves off to a good Bible study. Find out what it is about the Bible that Christian believes that makes it so abhorrent to aliens. And guess what happened to them? They got saved. And Joe now, he helps people who think that they've been abducted by aliens. He's become a counsellor, and in fact I've been able to pass a few people his way. And you know what, I just want to encourage you and not discourage you. I know there will be people in this room tonight who've seen something. And maybe you've had an experience. The fact whether you're a Christian or not doesn't matter. Sometimes we can be caught up in some mass episode. And often people have never had the ability to discuss it or have been frightened to discuss it. And that's okay. Because generally I would say 99% of all the meetings I go, I meet people in churches or elsewhere who've had these experiences. You know, I'm just offering, if you want to discuss it, have closure on it, I'm more than willing to have a chat with you.
Is the creation-evolution debate just a side issue? Can beliefs about where we came from impact the way people behave? How can we more effectively lead people to Christ when many believe science disproves the Bible? Some scientists say the world is billions of years old. Are they correct and the Bible wrong?
As a trained scientist, being a Christian, I had to try and juggle the millions of years of evolution with the Bible. And initially I was able to do that. But then I went along to a seminar, a creation seminar. I actually went along to tell these guys with PhDs where they were wrong. But during their presentation, I realised that I was the one who was wrong. You cannot fit evolution into the Bible, and you don't need to. The sorts of questions that I'm asked again and again: where did the races come from? Where did Cain get his wife? What about the dinosaurs? Are the sorts of questions that I used to challenge my Christian friends with when I was an atheist, and when they couldn't answer, I had no further reason to explore Christianity.
Dinosaurs was the biggest stumbling block for me because it was something, as a young child, I had been to museums, I had seen dinosaurs, I knew that the bones were real, I knew these were animals that had lived. But when I'd asked my RE teachers and Christians that I knew, and I pestered my RE teacher quite a bit about this issue, where are the dinosaurs in the Bible? And she did not know where she could find that, so rather than deal with my question, she put me out of the class eventually, and I just filled that time pursuing other interests. What changed my view was when I attended a creation meeting as a new Christian, and the speaker there was talking about all of the things that I'd had issues with, but especially dinosaurs and fossils, and how you can interpret that information with a biblical worldview, and I just found that really exciting as a new believer. The presentations are very easy to understand. Everything's done in layman's terms. There's a lot of PowerPoint presentation used as well. So very easy to understand, usually sitting on the edge of your seat through the whole presentation.
Questions about creation and evolution are a huge stumbling block for many, preventing them from believing the Bible. Creation evangelism is one of the most relevant and powerful methods of reaching our culture today. Find out how to use this fascinating information to reach your friends and neighbours. There's lots of free information on our website, creation.com.